Hi guys, Mrs. Kimball here from Kids Cook Real Food, and today I'm doing a little something different than I normally do on Tuesdays. Normally I talk to parents about tips on getting their kids in the kitchen and good parenting in general. Today I just really feel like I want to talk to kids who can read about how to understand the ingredients label and the nutrition facts on boxes, cans, bottles, and jars of things you buy at the store, of foods that we eat. Because I want you to be empowered. I want you to be smarter than the other kids around you. I want you to be smarter than you were yesterday when it comes to understanding what you're eating and how to read those labels and make decisions about what you want to ask your parents to buy or what you want to put in your body and what will be healthy. So the very first thing to understand when you're reading ingredients is that the ingredients are listed in the order of the amount that they are in the recipe. So for example, on the spaghetti sauce, tomato puree is the first ingredient. That means there's more tomato puree than anything else. Next is onions and then olive oil. That means there's more onions than olive oil. There's more olive oil than sea salt. There's more sea salt than garlic. And there's more garlic than sugar. So although usually I'm alarmed to see sugar in any ingredients, I do understand that if it's less than garlic, which is a pretty strong flavor, there's not much in there. But usually it's not a good thing to see. If you see sugar near the beginning of the ingredients list, right, in the first or second or even third position, that's a really good indication that it's something you should put back on the shelf unless you're eating it as a dessert. Does that make sense? Now, one more quick note about ingredients. This really throws kids off sometimes. Often an ingredient in a food has other ingredients. So like if you're buying chocolate chip cookies, the chocolate chip itself includes, cocoa powder and sugar and maybe vanilla, and it includes other things in the chocolate chip. So anytime that happens, the ingredients are shown in parentheses. So for example, on this spaghetti sauce, it says organic tomato puree, in parentheses, water, organic tomato paste, and citric acid. Okay, so that means the tomato puree itself had some other ingredients. Does that mean that there's more citric acid, which is just vitamin C and it's kind of preservative and it's not a really big deal? Does that mean there's more citric acid than onions because onions is second? No, citric acid is one of the tiny ingredients inside the puree. I hope that makes sense. So we just want to make sure that we're really looking at the order of ingredients to figure out what has more in that food and what has less. More is at the beginning, less is at the end, and then anything in parentheses is what's inside that ingredient of the ingredients. I hope that was at least somewhat clear. So what is a calorie anyway? A calorie, by definition, is a unit of energy. It's the idea that when we put food into our bodies, we can talk and move and think and remember, and everything we do with our bodies is fueled by the energy we get from calories. Now, calories are different depending on what kinds of food they come from. Here in front of me I've got oil and butter, which would be the fat macronutrient, flour, banana, and an apple, fruit, which is basically an example of the carbohydrate macronutrient, and cheese and fish, salmon and tuna, which is an example of more of a protein carbohydrate. Now, 1 gram, which is a very small amount, 1 gram of fat or oil is 9 calories. 1 gram of the carbohydrates or the proteins is 4 calories. The calorie number is the first thing you see when you look at those nutrition facts. So it seems like it should be most important, but does it really matter? No. That's the funny thing, is your body is going to use different kinds of calories in different ways. So that number doesn't really hold a lot of interest, and it doesn't really matter. So you can pretty much ignore that. So if calories don't matter, what does matter in all those numbers listed on the nutrition facts? Well, first of all, the type of fat that you're putting in your body definitely matters. Nutrition facts will split that out by total fat, saturated fat, and trans fat, okay? Saturated fat could go either way. Honestly, you need to know what the source of saturated fat is. Trans fat is definitely terrible, and that's what I want you to remember. T for trans fat, T for terrible. You never ever want to eat anything that has even half a gram or a gram of trans fat. We always want 0 grams of trans fat because trans fat was created by humans in a lab. Our bodies have no idea what to do with it. And there's lots and lots of research that shows that it's really harmful to our bodies, both as we grow and for older people. It can cause heart disease and tons of nasty stuff. Trust me on this one. Trans fat is terrible. We want 0 grams. Now there are some other kinds of fat. There's, like I said, saturated fat, which can be good or bad for you depending on where it comes from. We'll talk about that in a second. And there's unsaturated fat. It gets worse. Unsaturated fat has monounsaturated and polyunsaturated. How can we remember all of this stuff? Well, think about it this way. Monounsaturated fat is always really good for you. It's definitely the good fats. So mono is for me. Mono is for me. That is good unsaturated fat. Now, polyunsaturated fat is not nearly as good as mono. Polyunsaturated fat is in inflammatory things like corn oil and soybean oil and a lot of those really industrialized, like highly processed oils. So we're going to say polyunsaturated. P is a problem. P for problem, P for polyunsaturated. Okay? So as you're reading those labels, trans fat is terrible. Monounsaturated is good for me. Me. I want some monounsaturated fat. And polyunsaturated fat is a problem. If there's some in there, but there's more mono than poly, you're still okay. All right? There's always going to be a balance and a blend of all those different fats in nature, right? Trans fat's made in a lab, 0, 0, 0. No tolerance, terrible trans fat. Monounsaturated, polyunsaturated, saturated fats, most things that are grow in the ground or eat things that grow in the ground have a balance of all 3. So you're going to see some grams of all those, but we want mono to be the most because it's good for me, all those good M's. Polyunsaturated can be a problem, so we want to pare it down, all the P's. And saturated fat, we have to see where it's coming from. We'll talk about that in just a second. Now, as savvy ingredient label readers, you really want to know what fats are good and bad for you as you read them in the ingredients. In our house, we have lots of good, healthy fats that I can use as an example here. There's extra virgin olive oil, grass-fed butter, palm shortening, avocados or avocado oil. Those are, by the way, very high in monounsaturated fat, right? Good for me. Coconut oil, refined or unrefined is fine. Beef tallow, we use bacon grease here. That's not usually in ingredients though. But there are a lot of fats which are really inflammatory, which means they can cause your digestive system and your intestines not to do well. They can cause inflamed responses like an autoimmune disease. Hopefully you guys don't have to worry about that, but the more processing we do to oils, so like when you look at a kernel of corn, even if you squeeze it in your fingers, it's all starchy, it's not very oily, but yet somehow from that we create corn oil. Corn oil is a really good example of something very, very high in polyunsaturated fats, right? Poly is a problem. And all of these, we call them industrial oils, are in that category. So bad fats include corn oil, cottonseed, soybean, canola. And then we've got some that are in the like sort of kind of okay category. Safflower oil is better than the ones in the last group, but still not excellent. And then sunflower oil is another example of a pretty good oil, but not as good as the ones in front of me. So if I was looking at like maybe some potato chips, and I could choose one that said vegetable oil, which is a big umbrella term, usually for corn, cottonseed, canola, and soybean. Okay, all of them are kind of jumbled up in there. Vegetable oil is a no-no as well. If my potato chip choices are in vegetable oil, or corn oil, or cottonseed oil, or sunflower or safflower oil, if I'm having some munchy crunchies and I know I'm getting into some junk food anyway, I'm still going to choose the sunflower or safflower oil because I would rather have better for me junk food. Now, potato chips are almost a health food if you can find the ones, and there are some brands that cook them in coconut oil. almost a health food. They're still a little starchy, but honestly, when you're a growing kid, they're probably okay. So we gotta, again, understand the list of good fats, bad fats, and medium sort of so-so fats. Fats can be confusing. Some are good for you, some aren't. We gotta learn all these long words, but I'll tell you one thing that's never confusing. Sugar content, it's always bad for you, especially the higher it gets, and especially added sugars and processed sugars. So let's talk about this a little bit. You know, we can look at the nutrition facts and see a certain grams of sugar, but when we look at the ingredients, where does that sugar come from? Now, we want to really watch for certain words like sugar, of course. Anything with syrup in it, including high fructose corn syrup, but anything else, if it says syrup, it's a sugar. Honey, any word ending in OSE, so dextrose, maltose, fructose, anything that ends in ose is also going to be a sugar. Really, any ingredient that has the word juice in it is probably an added sweetener, as is anything with cane juice, cane extract. I don't know, there's a bunch of ways that they're now saying cane sugar, which is just sugar. It's all just sugar. And a lot of times if you see the word fruit, it's a fruit added sweetener, but it's still added and separate from its fiber. Now, next week in another video, we're going to talk about artificial sweeteners. That's a whole other category. But what you need to know today is that kids are recommended to keep under 25 grams of added sugar per day. Now, that's only 6 teaspoons. Some of the less conservative sources say maybe kids can handle up to 40 grams or 10 teaspoons of added sugar in a day, but that adds up fast. Because just a half can of soda pop is already 5 teaspoons of sugar. 5 teaspoons, that's 21 grams. That's pushing mighty close to the 25 grams of added sugar that kids should not go over in a day. And who drinks half a can anyway? Do you really want to be drinking your sugar, guys? I'm going to say no way, and I hope that you will follow suit. Have you heard that we're getting new labels that look different? For the first time, we'll be able to tell by reading the nutrition facts the difference between white sugar and the sugar found in fruit, like raisins. These new labels will have not only a line for total sugars, but they'll have a second line underneath for added sugars. Now, some companies are already doing this, even though they don't have to until 2020 or 2021, depending on how big they are. Here are 2 examples. Kind Bar is already listing the added sugars and has the new format, and Aldi on most of their products also does. So here's where it gets really interesting. In the Kind Bars, there's 5 grams of sugars, and 4 grams of those sugars are added. That means they come from a sweetener. Maybe it's sugar, maybe it's honey, maybe it's maple syrup, maybe it's high fructose corn syrup. Then we have to look at the ingredients to find out that it's probably mostly from glucose syrup, which is sugar, okay? In the pasta sauce, there's actually 6 grams of sugar, 1 gram more than a bar here, and that's for a half cup of pasta sauce, by the way. But it includes 0 grams added sugars. So all those grams of sugar must be found in the tomatoes themselves, because tomatoes are a fruit and have some carbohydrates. Isn't that interesting? Because there's no sugar on this new packaging, no sugar listed at all, like there was in the other one at the beginning of the video. And so it can actually say 0 grams added sugar. So this is really, really important. If you are looking at, let's say, a cereal or a granola, in the past it was kind of alarming to see a really high number next to sugars, like if you had raisins in, let's say, Raisin Bran. Not that I'm an advocate of cereal, but if you've got raisins in the food that you're buying, that's going to spike the sugar content super, super high, but at least they are natural sugars and they've got fiber. So that's another little tip here, is that we do want to look, when we're looking at a number of sugar grams, we need to have some fiber. So like fruit juice would have no fiber, but potentially a lot of sugar, maybe 5 or 10 grams a serving. Raisins, on the other hand, are at least going to have a little bit of fiber. Now, our raisins have 29 grams of sugars and only 2 grams of fiber. So that's not awesome, but still we know that eating raisins is better than eating straight white sugar for example, like in a piece of candy. Man, I hope you learned a lot. I really want you to spend time this week reading nutrition labels, reading ingredients, trying to figure out what things mean. Use the download we've provided for you to help you really remember and assimilate all this information. And next week, we're going to do another chat on strategies or tactics that food marketers use to trick you. Plus, a few more fake foods to watch out for. I'm Mrs. Kimball from Kids Cook Real Food, and I'll see you next week.